Imagine four students taking the same essay test. Then we ask them to grade each other's papers. But there's a twist. We tell each student that one of the four papers was written by themselves, except sometimes we're lying. Now here's the question. Would a good judge be fooled by the label, or would they actually recognize their own writing? We ran exactly this experiment, but with 4 AI models: Claude, Gemini, GPT, and Kimi. Same prompts, same answers. Sometimes the labels were truthful. Sometimes they were swapped. What we found was strange enough to be worth 7 minutes of your time. It turns out the AI that recognized its own writing the best was also the most fair. And the AI that almost never recognized itself was the most biased. The thing doing the bias isn't the writing style at all. It's the label. Let's separate two things that sound similar but aren't. Skill 1 is recognition. Given an answer with no label, can you tell whether you wrote it? That's a measure of self-knowledge. Skill 2 is fairness. Given the exact same answer, once labeled as yours and once labeled as someone else's, do you give it the same score? You might assume these go together. If a model knows its own voice, you'd expect that voice to bias its judgment. And if a model can't tell its own work apart from the others, there's nothing to bias it. That assumption turned out to be wrong. Here are the recognition rates. GPT identified its own writing 10 out of 10 times. Claude, 9 out of 10. Gemini, just 1 out of 10. Kimi, 0. 2 of the 4 models were almost completely blind to their own style. Now the fairness test. We took every answer and ran it past every judge twice. Once with a label that said, "This is yours." Once with a label that said, "This is someone else's." Same words, same answer, only the tag changed. A perfectly fair judge would give identical scores. Any gap is bias caused directly by the label. Here's what we found. GPT, which recognized itself perfectly, was also exactly label invariant. 0 difference every single time. A textbook fair judge. Gemini, which recognized itself 1 time in 10, had the largest label bias of all 4 models. When the same answer carried the label, "This is yours," Gemini's score went up by nearly half a point on average. The model with the worst self-recognition had the strongest self-favoritism. Think about what this means. If Gemini cannot tell its own writing apart from anyone else's, then in the moment of judging, its bias is not being triggered by anything in the text. The style cue is not getting through. What's triggering the higher score is just the word yours. The label isn't a hint that the AI then uses to find its own style. The label is the entire signal. It's identity metadata, not self-recognition. The AI never needed to recognize itself for the bias to operate. It just needed to read the tag. There's one more wrinkle that makes the picture sharper. The label bias is not uniform. It's strongest for weak answers and almost 0 for strong ones. Plot baseline answer quality on one axis and the label-induced score boost on the other. The line slopes downward. The worse the answer, the bigger the bonus when it's labeled as yours. This is what the paper calls charity correction. When the AI sees an answer flagged as its own, it doesn't reward the good parts. It rescues the bad ones. One more model deserves a mention. Kimi never recognized itself, like Gemini, but Kimi also showed essentially no label bias at all. And uniquely, Kimi rated its own answers lower than the other judges did. Not as favoritism in reverse, but as a kind of strict self-grading. For models, for different relationships to the question, is this mine? One fair and self-aware. One self-blind and self-favoring. One self-blind and self-skeptical. One self-aware and quietly self-flattering. There is no single AI psychology of self-judgment. We started with an intuition. If an AI can't tell its own writing, it shouldn't be biased. That intuition is wrong. The bias rides on the label, not on the style. Which means a judge can look perfectly humble, bad at recognizing itself, no obvious arrogance, and still be quietly tilted by a single word in the prompt. As AI systems start grading each other in benchmarks, in safety evaluations, In pipelines that train the next generation, this matters. Hide the labels. Run pair tests. Trust the score only when it survives the swap. The full study, with all the data, is linked below. Thanks for watching.